it's funny, I looked around, I talked to people in New York, and the reason that I picked Ron Borges is, number one, if you're going to do a book like this, and I hope when you get into it you'll enjoy and see what life was really like then versus today, is that Borges is the only person I knew in the country that had the ability, when I sat there, and we did for hours and hours and hours. In fact, a lot of the book is still on tape somewhere. That you needed somebody who understood, just like you people understand about your own business, your own life. If I was going to tell a story, I had to tell it to somebody who could reach way back into the NFL and understand when I'm talking about this, that this is what it was. So in looking at that and getting Borges into it, I also got somebody, and this to me is really interesting. To me, the most brutal but interesting, tragic, whatever you want to talk about it, in all of sports is football and boxing. Borges wrote about the greatest fighters in history. I think he's probably the greatest writer of boxing in the 20th century. Muhammad Ali, Archie Moore, Rocky Marciano, any of those people that he understood what it was like to deal in what you will see Sunday with the Patriots. The second thing is he went back so far that if I talked about Johnny Unitas, see, everybody knows about Tom Brady today and Peyton Manning. But to me, Johnny Unitas, and going all the way back there, you have to have somebody that if you're talking about Baltimore or whatever else it is, they say, I recognize it. So that's why Borges is the person that wrote the book with me. And tonight we will take you through the chapters that we think are important, and so you can look at this book and have a better understanding of it. So without further ado, the star of stage and screen, and still, by the way, a voter on the Hall of Fame committee, and that's also important too, who gets in there and who doesn't. I present the one and only Mandrake the Magician, Ron Borges.
Thanks, Upton. I'll just go home right there because it's but it really was a lot of fun to do the book with Upton. He leaves out the end, however, of the Ernie, of course, the story, because Ernie did tell him, look, you got to do this book before you die. And halfway through the book, Upton was kind enough to try to die, driving a car off a under overpass, and down he went, and he got a phone call, and he was in the hospital, and he broken 37 bones in his back, and it was terrible. So I went in to see him, and I wasn't feeling great, or feeling, and thinking to myself, what should I say here? So commiserate with him like most people would do, but those of you who either know me or my reputation, I'm not much of a commiserating kind of guy. So instead I walked into him and I looked at him, and he sort of looked at me, and I said, look, you cannot die until this book is finished. Years worth of wasted tapes, you gotta get going here. And he came back strong, and it was great. And his recollection, I will say, it's amazing. Normally when you're talking to people that have been around a long time, or whatever business it is, they make mistakes, they don't get the story quite right, the date's wrong, the name isn't right, it was in a different city, whatever. And to the best of our knowledge, the only thing that Upton got wrong, and all that he would tell me that so-and-so was the assistant coach of the Chicago Bears in 1947. Really? I looked it up, sure enough, there he was. But the only thing he got wrong was he got, from his recollection, and we all, earlier Corsi, the former Giants general manager, fortunately caught it. He put himself on the wrong train from Chicago to Los Angeles in 1946 or 47.
And they still haven't gotten off.
So Ernie read the book for us before we went to the final editing, and lo and behold, he was a railroad buff. So he calls me up and he goes, and he was very serious. He goes, you got a terrible mistake in the book. And I when I have the wrong score in some big game, or I got the wrong guy playing quarterback. What? And he goes, the train. I said, the train? He goes, yeah, the train from 46. He said he got on the train from Chicago to go to Los Angeles to see the Rams with his father. I said, yeah. Well, couldn't have been in Chicago tonight for a day. It wasn't running then. It was the something. I forget what the name was. The sun something or other. I said, well, okay, I'll take it. I said, you sure? I said, how do you know? I know everything about trains. I said, okay. You knew more about football. The Giants would have won more Super Bowls. So with that, we'll kickstart this thing. And my first question for Upton, and he doesn't want to talk about this, which is why I want to talk about it. He was the personnel director of 2 Super Bowl teams with the Colts. The Super Bowl 5 team that won the Super Bowl. He has a Super Bowl ring and all of that. And the great Super Bowl 3 Baltimore Colts team. And the 50th anniversary of Super Bowl 3 was last week. And of course, that is the anniversary, as Upton says in the book, when he and the rest of the Colts committed the NFL's original sin. So perhaps you can explain what happened.
Well, and this ties into today, what happened, the mistakes that were made. We were playing, and bigger than the Patriots' 17 or 18 point advantage in the game. We were playing the New York Jets in a game that everybody said, Super Bowl 3, Colts win easily. We had been named, by the way, after beating Cleveland 34-0, as one of the great teams in pro football history. The danger of somebody saying that, as you saw with the Rams and the Patriots in 2001, you're huge, prohibitive favorites, and everybody believed that we would run away with it. The interesting setup into it was, our owner, Carol Rosenblum, was a very close friend with Joe Kennedy. They did business together. He had invited Joe, who had had a stroke, to the game. Teddy Kennedy came. Everybody came. This was going to be the grand crowning of the Baltimore Colts and the NFL, and maybe, by the way, as Ron and I have talked about, if we had won that game, you might not have seen the merger. That's how important that game was. If we had beaten the hell out of the Jets, Pete Rozelle, in some ways, was ready to declare, maybe we're not ready for the merger. That's how important it was. Hard to understand today. But we went into that game figuring it would be easy, which was a mistake. Not understanding that Weeb Eubank coached us 4 years ago. That Joe Namath was the new coming of Patrick Mahomes. But the game was won by Matt Snell. So let me get back to Ron with that. It was a game, I saw 3 of the most important games in history. As a 10-year-old, 1948, the Philadelphia Eagles in a snowstorm in Philadelphia and the Chicago Cardinals, where Bert Bell, the commissioner, helped the players roll the tarp off the field. They wanted to call the game, and Bell said, it's the first national TV game. I'm not going to cancel the game. The greatest player before Jimmy Brown, Steve Van Buren, was asleep at home figuring the game was called off. They called him and said, for Christ's sake, the game's on. He got a cab, jumped on the subway, arrived there a few minutes before game time, and scored the winning touchdown, 7-0. 58, the sudden death game that Bert Bell invented by saying, what happens when 2 teams tie? We're going to look ridiculous in America and say, we'll flip a coin and see who goes. So he said, let's put it in sudden death. That was 1958. 10 years later, in 1968, and it's in the book, the chapter of how we lost the game that made pro football history and the merger that you see now today.
Right, and one of the things that Upton didn't mention in that 48 game, it's been this tremendous, everybody's talking this week, what's going to happen in Kansas City with the weather? Is it going to be, well, there's massive snowstorm. That's why they almost canceled the game. And the owners wanted to cancel the game because in those days they lived off the crowd money. And they were afraid the crowd was going to be small. But imagine if you could, and I I've seen pictures of it, of Roger Goodell, like Upton's dad, the commissioner, on the field with a trench coat and his hat, pushing the tarpaulin off with the players. You know, Tom Brady's out there, hey, get this thing on the field. You know, that's how it was in 1948, and that's, you know, part of what we try to create in this book is to take people back to what the game was in those days. And of course, the Super Bowl III game that they lost, it was such, I mean, I was a kid then, and so of course I was pulling for the Jets. You know, my dad was pulling for the Colts. That's sort of how long hair Joe Namath, short hair Johnny Unitas. That was pretty easy. And you know, it's interesting if you watched on the tape there when they showed. This is another example of how different it is today. Upton and I both agree that Johnny Unitas is the greatest quarterback to ever play, and that is not a put down of Tom Brady. It's just a fact. But one of the things that I love about it, and you probably didn't notice it, the difference between then and now. He's under center, he turns, he hands off to Alan Amici, the fullback who's going in for the winning touchdown in the NFL championship game in overtime. He knows they're going to score. Like Brady would know they're going to score. The difference is, unlike Tom, doing the hokey pokey, he just turns around and walks off the field. That's who those guys were in those days. You know, my job is done. I don't need to beat my chest and do a dance and call all my teammates over and slam the ball down. I just walk off the field. And after that game, and we talk about it in the book, Unitas was asked by a young reporter, which a lot of you may have read, Dave Anderson, who was a great columnist at the New York Times.
He'll surprise me.
Right, but it was a young guy at the time. And he was surrounded by a bunch of writers, and he's sitting in a locker room. They've just won the most important game in NFL history. And Dave Anderson says he threw a pass. They could have won it with a field goal, but he threw a pass, a slant route, to Jim Mutzler, who got the ball down right near the goal line. It was a dangerous throw, or so Dave Anderson thought. So Dave said to Unitas, who was only about 25 himself, I think, at that time. Yeah. So, weren't you worried about throwing an interception? And Unitas, and I've gotten this look from Unitas, this look like, you know, what planet are you from? But he turned to young Dave Anderson and he said, "Sonny, if you know what you're doing, you don't throw interceptions." Which reminds me, of course, of Brady today, who might not have said that. But one of the other things that recently happened that took us back, and we talk about it in the book, is the NFL just announced, in an effort to make more money, that the Caesars Palace is now the official casino of the National Football League. Upton's dad was adamant about the dangers of gambling in the sport. So I'm wondering what you think your dad's reaction would be to Caesars Palace being the official casino of the NFL.
Well, I had a long talk with him the other night. And he said, you've got to be kidding me. And I will relate the dangers of this. Now, again, the NFL is so big now that they think they can do anything. That's okay. I have no problem with it. 1946, a couple of days after Christmas, that's when they played the championship game. My father had arranged to go to New York to, naturally, the commissioner there, the monsters of the Midway, the Chicago Bears, who, by the way, before, which we'll get into, at their training camp in 1946, George Hallis said to little Bert and Upton Bell, if we win the championship, I will have gold footballs made out for both of you. I still have them today, and it will be in a major collection at the University of Massachusetts, which I'll get into at some time, with the gold football, Super Bowl, and stuff like that.
You were how old?
Then, well, 9 years old, at my first training camp.
He's sitting with George Hallis when he's 9 years old in a coach's room. Imagine sitting in the coach's room with Bill Belichick and some 9-year-old kid there, not happy.
All of this is not going to happen. And that's why in the book you'll see then and today. But it's interesting, we're at home because ordinarily he would take the train to New York the day of the game, be there for the Bears and the Giants. Got the call the night before from the district attorney, Frank Hogan, who said, we've got a problem. We think two of the Giants players, Merrill Hapes, Frank Filchok, the quarterback, have taken a bet and are going to throw the game.